we have a responsibility to raise our children properly. Those of you who are not raising children or never had children, again, are not off the hook simply because we have the responsibility to model Christ in what we do. Children follow what they see and not what we tell them. Ephesians 5:1-2. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. I can tell you this by working with youth, working in school setting. I've been a teacher and in a Christian school administrator since 1993. A long time. I have a lot of experience. Youth and children act how we act, not what we say. And they know the deal. They know how we act. They look. They model. Because our actions speak louder than words. I'm reminded of the movie, and I'm going to date myself here. Anyone here grew up in the 80s or 90s? Anyone remember the movie Say Anything? The famous scene where the boyfriend holds the boombox up for the girlfriend and plays and tries to woo her heart. Everyone remember that? I know, we were under such pressure in the 80s because we had to do that to our girlfriends. We had to go out in our girlfriend's house at 6 o'clock in the morning with a boombox playing Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes while the fathers are probably like turning the garden hose on us. Like, what are you doing? So, it was a movie of the 80s. If you don't know the movie follows a gentleman by the name of Lloyd, and Lloyd is enamored, and Lloyd's kind of he's an athlete, and he's not really studious at all, and he just kind of is flown with the wind, and his goal is to be a kickboxer and to date Diane Court, and Diane Court happened to be the valedictorian of the school, who didn't know who Lloyd was. But eventually he asks her out and he goes out with her. And, they build a relationship. But there's one scene that reminds me of people, that doing what you do is a lot more powerful than what they say. There's a scene in the movie where Diane and Lloyd break up because, of course, it's a teenage angst movie for the 80s. So there's got to be some conflict there. So they break up. And Lloyd is driving around town, and he's talking into his tape recorder, recording his thoughts, because that's what he does. And he meets a bunch of guys at, the mini mart there, who are all sitting there, the 5 of them, and they're sitting there, and they're just hanging out, and, they're smoking, and they're drinking, and they're doing what they shouldn't be doing on a Saturday night. And there's no girls around, and they're all telling Lloyd, what you have to do with a girl, you got to do this, you got to do that. They're giving him all this kind of love advice. And he asks them the question, he goes, if you guys know so much about women, what are you doing here on a Saturday night with no girls around? And they all look very awkwardly at each other, and there's a hesitant moment of silence, and then one kid goes, by choice. And they're like, yeah, by choice. So, and it was kind of a funny part in the movie, and he goes, well, that was a mistake. He leaves. Again, their actions spoke louder than their words there. So Lloyd knew. If you want to know, Diane and Lloyd get back together. So enough with the movie plug here. With that, we'll go on with that. But in raising up a child, there is also another concept that we can use, and it comes from a story in the Bible, and the story is what you will know as the prodigal son. And I want to make it very clear that the primary message in the prodigal son story is simply that Jesus came to redeem those who recognize their sinfulness rather than those who consider themselves righteous. That's the primary message of the prodigal son. I don't want anyone to eat Pastor Bobby say, hey, Klein said the prodigal son story is really about raising kids. No, it is about how Jesus came to redeem those who recognize their sinfulness rather than those who consider themselves righteous. But there is another concept we could take from the story, a secondary concept. So the disclaimer now over. Secondary lesson of this story models parenting principles that reflect the heart of God. And how does God parent his children? And I'm going to break it down in 4 scenes. The first scene is from Luke 15, 11, and 12. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Two amazing things happened here. A child went up to his father and said, give me the inheritance. That's incredible. What gumption that took. And what is even more amazing is dad said yes. I can tell you right now, if Rachel or Andrew comes up to me and says, hey, give me the inheritance I would get when you would die, I would say a couple of things. I would say, one, mom and dad are in ministry. There's really not that much inheritance. And two, I would say no. Or I would say, do you want that quarter now or do you want that in installments? Do that. But amazingly so, dad said yes. Dad said yes. You can have your inheritance and you could go. They were probably very wealthy for that. The father allowed his son to make a choice. And we all have choices in life. And I always tell students this. I always tell my own children this. I said, there are choices that you can make. Life is filled with making choices. Good choices or bad choices. Parents, I hate to tell you this, we can't make all the choices for our children. We simply can't. There's a sermon I preach to the youth at Winter Haven Christian School, and I title it, The One Choice You Get to Make. And that is a choice whether you choose to follow Christ or not. We cannot take our kids into heaven with us. That's a decision they need to make on their own. And that's the ultimate choice. But there's a whole bunch of other smaller choices that your children make. Of course, as a parent, you guide those choices. You know, your kid says they want Twinkies for dinner. No, you're not going to do that. But anyway, and this is true as you see in Deuteronomy 30:15 through 20. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today, by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways and keeping his commandments and his statutes and his rules, then you will live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering and take possession of it. But if your heart turns away and you will not hear, but are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are going over to Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him. For he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. God gave his people a choice. He's God. He could have forced them. But he said, you have a choice. The word choice appears in the Bible all the time. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So do we offer our children choices? Do we have them make choices? Well, I would say without choices, children grow up to be immature. You can't make decisions for your child. Obviously, I am in a different boat than someone with a newborn baby. My children are 17 and 20, respectively. They have to make choices. They have to make decisions. They have to do things. I'll guide them. Ultimately, if they're living in my house, there will come a time where I'll put my foot down and say, no, you're not doing that in my house. But there are choices. Rachel gets a little bit more freedom than Andrew does. Rachel's away at college. Andrew's still under our house. Next year, Andrew will be away at college, and he'll have more freedoms there. Like, for example, Rachel will be like, can I see this movie? It's rated R. I'm like, that's your decision, sweetie. But it's like, hey, can I rent this movie that's rated R and bring it to the house? No. Again, because it's like, this is my house. But there are decisions, there are choices that you get to make in there. Let's look at scene 2 of the prodigal son story. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. He went to the equivalent of Las Vegas at the time, I'm imagining. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.'" A couple of things. Keep in mind that Jesus is telling this story to Jews in the land. Jews and pigs don't really go along very well, as if you know anything about the kosher laws. He squandered all his wealth. He squandered all his money. My guess it wasn't a day. It probably could have been years that he took, because it's going to take a while to squander that wealth. So if someone gave me $1 million and say squander it, I probably will not be done by the end of the day today. But I will have fun trying. So it probably took him a while, but things got so bad in this scenario that he eventually had to become a servant, and the famine was so severe that he was longing to be eating the pods that the pigs ate. Pig slop. I have a dog and 2 cats. I could tell you that I hope I am never hungry to the point where I want to eat their food. And they're dogs and cats. Their food's probably a little bit better than what pigs are eating. Verse 17 says, when he came to himself, I like the NIV version better, and there's not many things I like the NIV better, but the NIV says when he came to his senses. How many times, Joe, have you come to your senses? When he came to himself, he realized, I really made a mistake here. Galatians 6:7-10. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows in his own flesh, from the flesh will reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit, from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary of doing good, but in due season we reap if we do not give up. So then we have an opportunity. Let us do good to everyone, and especially in those who are of the household of faith. You see, there was consequences for his actions in the story of the prodigal son. And parents, and I wish I could sit in every parent's home at Winter Haven Christian School and say the following words: sometimes your kids need to suffer the consequences of what they do. And we are growing more and more in a society where people try to shield others of the consequences that they do. It's not a bad thing. I have learned greatly from many consequences and mistakes that I have made throughout my life. Rebecca and I will have discussions about the kids, about a choice that they will make. And often, we will have this discussion. My wife will say, do you think Rachel and or Andrew might regret this choice? And I go, maybe. I say, but they have to make that decision. And of course, I'll guide them. I'll say, yeah, I don't think you should do that. But I'll say, it's your life. Whatever you want to do, you do that. Should I buy this? Should I buy that? Should I quit this job? Should I not take this job? Should I take this job? That's your decision, but I'll give you the advice. And then sometimes, and as a parent, isn't this a great little nugget when they come back to you and say, hey, old man, you might have been right. Funny, right? It's like, wow. Sometimes dad and mom do know something, and they do that. But consequences are not a bad thing. And again, we live in a society that tries to shield from consequences. I remember I was teaching world history. We were doing a unit on Europe. The students had to pick someone from European world history, the continent on the other side of the Atlantic, and do a term paper and a biography about that person. A student handed me a wonderful paper about Harriet Tubman, not European, American history, fantastic paper. I gave it a 0. The parent came in. Why did you give it a 0? This is a European history unit, world history. 0. The parent said, but she worked so hard on it. I said, ma'am, I do not doubt that at all. And in fact, if I hired someone to dig a ditch in my backyard and I came home and they dug a ditch in my front yard, I do not doubt at all that they worked hard digging that ditch in my front yard, but I paid them to dig a ditch in my backyard. There are consequences. Got a 0. Can she do it again? No. Sorry, life doesn't work that way. I'll give her an opportunity to make up the grade later in some other form or fashion. But that's it. Consequences. And I get frustrated with parents, and I'm sorry. I shouldn't be preaching, but I am. but you can't shield from consequences. Both of my kids played sports. I told both of my kids, I am not going to your coach and complaining about your playing time. I'm not. Playing time is earned. So, told both of my kids, I said, when you sign up for that team and that club, you will see it through to the end. At the end of the season, if you don't want to play anymore, that's fine. Say, I'm quitting now. Halfway through the season, if you were a starter and now you're riding the bench, you cannot come to me and say, I quit now. No. That's not how life works. And again, I'm not going to go to your coach and complain about playing time. I refereed youth hockey. Can I say something to the parents whose kids are involved in youth sport? The referees in those games are making $20 a game, maybe. They don't care which set of 9-year-olds win, despite what the parents yelling at you think. I always laughed. I always did youth hockey, and they would yell, you have it out for a team. Yes, I went to Vegas this morning and I bet on a 10-year-old youth hockey game. like we don't care who wins. And all you have to do is go on YouTube and see parents and bad parents. I'm sure you've all seen it. One year my son played t-ball in Little League, and we could have either spent $50 or I could have volunteered to be an umpire. And I said, well, let's save the $50 and I'll be the umpire. Worst $50 I never spent. Because I had to umpire one game and they were older. And let me tell you something, I did not call it by the book because I wanted to get out of there. And when the first pitch was about 2 feet wide and I yelled, strike one, and the person looked behind me, I was like, swing the bat, kid. I got to be somewhere at noon. We got to go somewhere. Again, worst $50 I never spent. He didn't do t-ball after. I think he only did one season. If he did season 2, I would have been like, yeah, here's my $50. But in the prodigal son story, the parent made their child see consequences, because without consequences, children grow up to be irresponsible. They have to make mistakes. Yes, you protect them, and I'm not saying be so harsh and so legalistic. Josh, you have your little daughter there. If she's walking towards a stove that's hot, don't be like, well, she has to experience consequences. Like, no. No. But in life, they need to experience some consequences for what they do. Let's go to scene 3. The verse before says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And the father said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. There was consequences, but in this scene you see the father met the child with compassion. And we need to have compassion. When my children mess up, do I sit there and go over their bed and go like, ha ha? Well, sometimes I do. No, I usually will tell them I'm right. I'm like, Dad was right again. So, batting 1,000. But you need to treat your children with compassion. I often tell parents when they're in my office, when a child does something wrong, I'm usually the one who has to make the phone call when the child's in my office doing something, and I have different responses from parents. I get the not my child, like my child would never do that. You know, I want to not bash parents. 95% of parents fall into the reasonable range of, Mr. Klein, thank you, we'll take care of it. I get some, not my child. I get others who are like, that kid is going to be grounded until 2038, and I'm going to beat him within an inch of his life. And I always tell parents, I said, there's one thing you should never take away from your child, and that's hope. And that you should have compassion. Are there consequences for doing wrong? Did we punish our children when they did something wrong? Yes, we did. But we tried to never not have compassion. We always told them we loved them. We always tried to, have compassion towards them when they mess up. Because without compassion, children grow up to be irate. I think it's interesting if you go back earlier in the verse and you see the father saw the son a long way off, and the father saw him and was filled with compassion, and he ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. In Jewish culture back in Jesus' day, that did not happen. Children approached their parents with reverence, and the parent often stood there. It was not common for a parent to run off and get their child. But in this story, again, that wasn't part of their cultural norms. It wasn't part of their cultural mores for a father to run off to a child and show compassion for it. But in the prodigal son story, you see that. Just as God runs with compassion for us. Because we are sinners. At least I am. Anyone else? Am I the only one? It's all right. But you have to show compassion for your children when they mess up. Be there for them. Because then they grow up to be irate. You don't want to be so legalistic that they are just filled with anger and resentment. Yes, they get the consequences of their work, but you don't, as I say, spike the football. Be like, told you. And keep on holding it over them and keep on, you say, okay, this is a teachable moment. And please understand me, I am not the perfect parent. Those two could probably tell you he's not the perfect parent. But we try to do the best we can. And then that leads us to scene 4. There's always a monkey wrench. Now the older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. What's going on? And he called to one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry, and he refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you. The implication is that the prodigal son was gone for years. I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad for this, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Parents with more than one kid, do you get this as well? The first thing, well, you did it for this kid. Why can't you do it for me? That's one of my biggest pet peeves. God forbid Rachel up in Tallahassee finds out we went out to dinner. You, Mom, and Andrew went out to dinner? That means I get to order something from DoorDash, right? On your credit card. No. But Andrew got to go out to dinner. Are you laughing, Rachel? Does that not happen? Rachel and I work together at the office, come home, she has a Starbucks cup. Andrew's like, she got Starbucks? Where's mine? And I'm like, this doesn't always work this way, but they seem to think it does. Like we have to have it like equal, like 50-50. Like sometimes we go out to dinner, Rachel, without you, and sometimes we do. Besides, you're up at college. So do that. I do jest, but those conversations actually do happen. Like where's mine? So here, on a larger sense, the other son is like, hey, you haven't even given me a goat. Apparently that was a thing in Jewish thing. Like a goat was like the most popular thing on a Friday night. Hey, someone get your parents a goat. But anyway, like you gave him half the inheritance and now you're celebrating with him. You haven't even given me a goat. And the father explained, he was lost and now he's found. And what's interesting in this story, which I never even realized until I read through it a lot, is that now the father is setting back and we're back at the beginning. Does that second son ask for his inheritance and go off because he's angry? I never thought of that. These parables that Jesus spoke, did they really happen? That's one of the first questions I have when we get to heaven. Like, did someone really bury their talent? Or was that just a parable? Or did this really happen? I seem to think it really did happen. So I guess we'll find out when I get to glory. Or I'll just be in the presence of Jesus and not care about them. But in scene 4, the father answered his son with conviction. Your brother was lost, and now he's found. He's alive. And without conviction, children grow up to be insecure. We need to answer our children with conviction. These are the 4 main points that I have there. They're up there, right? Yes, I see everyone looking. The C's in the eyes from the 4 scenes of the prodigal son. Without choices, children grow up to be immature. Without consequences, children grow up to be irresponsible. Without compassion, children grow up to be irate. Without conviction, children grow up to be insecure. So if you take notes, if you want to do that, if you don't have the notes, you can email me, I'll send them to you, or text me. I'll send you the four main points there. But the father answered the second son with conviction right there. He was firm. They grow up to be insecure. You need to answer your children with conviction. You need to have conviction. I tell the teachers at the school, I tell my wife, I said, when everything is going south, we cannot panic. I tell the teachers, I say, when the fire alarm goes off, you cannot be the one going, the fire alarm's going off, what do we do? Like, you need to have conviction in what you say. Because one of these times, that fire alarm might be real. I tell my wife, I said, you need to be steady, you need to be there. I try to do that. 2 years ago, my wife fell down in Marco Island and really severely hurt herself. And I immediately went into mode, what I have to do. I immediately went into like conviction mode. Like, okay, we need to get ice, we need to do this, I need to see what her symptoms are, I need to see if I had to call 911. And I went into this administrator mode. We actually called 911, the ambulance came. My wife had this huge, nasty, bruise from the top of her head. She fell down and hit the curb there. She was sitting there crying on the ground there. And I immediately went to like conviction mode, like I gotta do this. Then she gets into the ambulance and she's going to the hospital and we're following, and I realize my 2 children are in the backseat crying. And I didn't really have the compassion at that stage. I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta get out of like conviction mode. And I gotta be like Mom will be okay. Let's pray. Do that. But you need to have conviction with your children, or they're going to be insecure. If you're panicking over everything, my children have never really heard discussions of Rebecca and I being like, there's 27 cents in the checking account and the mortgage is due. Because then they'd be insecure. And praise God, our bills have always been paid. We've never been late on a mortgage payment. We've always had food in the house. We've always had cars running. So we've always had a roof over our head. We've always done that. But you have to have conviction or they're insecure. As a parent, you cannot to your children, you have to convey to them that you are strong, that you have it all together. You can't be a mess in front of your kids, or your kids will be a mess as well. They need to be secure. One, in your love for them. Two, in everything. We all have struggles, but we all make it through them. But again, in the end of the prodigal son scene, the father is faced with the child. And again, who knows what happens there? Who knows if that child asks for his inheritance? And will he give it again? Did the parent learn from his mistake? Like, I'm not doing this again. Because sometimes when you have more than one child, you make mistakes on the first one. Sorry, Rachel. And you're like, ooh, that probably wasn't a good idea. Lesson learned for next time. So do that. So again, my two children are older, and I love my two children to death. And I am by far not the perfect parent. And that I do have a lot of experience with youth, and I kind of had a training ground. I kind of knew how to deal with teenagers before my kids became teenagers, thanks to me being a teacher and doing that. But again, there are things that I'm not ready for. Ladies who have newborns, please don't hand me your baby. I won't know what to do. So every now and then, Rebecca and I will joke, and Rebecca will be like, maybe I'm pregnant. And it's like 50 years old. I said, I wouldn't know what to do at this stage. I'd like hand the kid a grilled cheese sandwich. Be like, here you go. Been there, done that. Cereal is on the top shelf. So, but it's okay, because one day, hopefully not too soon, I'll have grandchildren, and then it'll start all over again. And I hear they're a lot more fun, because you get to give the kid back. He's a cranky child. Good. So when it's your child having the temper tantrum in the supermarket floor, you can't do anything. But if it's my grandchild, it'd be like, Rachel, Andrew, here's your kid. And do that. So anyway, thank you for paying attention. I appreciate this opportunity to preach here. I do. Let's try to get us out of here so we can beat the Presbyterians to lunch. And you could all text Bobby and say, hey, Joe got us out and we beat the Presbyterians to the restaurant. And we could do that. Let's remember the group. They are in Nicaragua. You have to forgive me. I'm going to always refer to it as Central America. Our school does missions to Guatemala, Honduras, and now our church does Nicaragua. So if my brain is not really confused as to what Central American country anyone's in at any given time, we'll do that. But let me close out in a word of prayer.